Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever sat on your bed at night, phone in hand, staring at his name, wondering, is he even thinking about me the way I'm thinking about him? Because I've been on the other side of that, coaching incredible women who are smart, successful, beautiful, and still feel invisible to the one man they wish would just notice their worth. And it's frustrating, right? You show up, you give your best, you try to be thoughtful, kind, interesting, but he's still not obsessed with you the way you deserve. So today, we're flipping the script. I want to show you that being unforgettable isn't about changing who you are. It's about dialing into the things that make a man not just want you, but need you in his life. These aren't games, they're shifts. Mindset shifts, behavior shifts, energy shifts backed by real human psychology. And once you understand them, you'll stop trying to be enough because you'll know that the right man won't be able to get you out of his head. So if you're ready to stop chasing and start attracting on a whole new level, let's get into it. Because the woman he can't stop thinking about, she doesn't try harder. She just knows exactly how to show up. You know, there's a deep misunderstanding in our culture today, especially among younger people, about what makes someone truly memorable in a relationship. We're constantly being sold this idea that attraction, physical, surface level charm is enough to build and sustain something meaningful, but that's simply not true. Attraction might open the door, but it doesn't keep anyone in the room. What endures is emotional impact. That's what stays in someone's psyche long after the conversation ends. I've seen this play out not only in the people I've worked with, but in my own life. When I was younger, I remember dating someone who, by all standards, was incredible, beautiful, sharp, ambitious. But for some reason, when she left, I didn't think about her much. There wasn't anything she left with me emotionally. No imprint. It was like a conversation with no echo. Later, I met a woman who wasn't trying to impress me at all. She just saw me. She asked thoughtful questions. She responded in ways that made me feel like what I said actually mattered. And I found myself thinking about her days later, not because of how she looked, but because of how she made me feel about myself. That's emotional impact. We remember people who make us feel seen, safe, inspired, or alive. The goal isn't to perform or to be liked. The goal is to be present enough, real enough, intentional enough that when someone walks away from you, they carry a piece of that moment with them. And when they carry that moment, they carry you. Because long after beauty fades from memory, emotional resonance still echoes. When people talk about love or attraction, they often focus on trait shows, someone looks, what job they have, how confident they seem in a room. But those things are static. They don't evolve with experience. And more importantly, they don't linger in memory the way emotional association does. What keeps someone coming back to a person, what truly makes someone irreplaceable, isn't a resume of qualities, it's the emotional echo you leave behind when you're gone. Now, I've taught hundreds of people over the years, many of whom were trying to figure out why a connection fizzled out after what seemed like a great date or a promising start. And often, it's not because they did anything wrong. It's because they didn't create a feeling worth returning to. If you're just pleasant or polite or conventionally attractive, that's not going to separate you from the noise. What separates you is becoming the trigger for something meaningful. Let me give you a simple example. I once had dinner with a woman who didn't just talk, she made me feel. She brought up a story about her father, not to impress, but because it revealed something deeply, human gratitude, humility, growth. I walked away that night not thinking about her outfit, not her laugh, but how she made me reflect on my own relationship with my dad. That stayed with me. Days later, I found myself thinking about her in moments that had nothing to do with romance. That's the key. You have to connect with someone in a way that's emotionally coded. That every time they feel hope, relief, inspiration, or comfort they think of you. Because when someone becomes emotionally associated with a feeling you value, they stop being an option. They become a part of your inner world. People are fascinated by what they don't fully understand. It's wired into us. We are pattern-seeking creatures, constantly trying to decode the world around us, and that includes people. But here's the paradox. The moment we feel like we've completely figured someone out, we stop paying attention. The brain labels it known and moves on. That's the danger of oversharing, over-explaining, or putting every detail of yourself on display too soon. You may think you're building connection, when in reality, you're killing curiosity. I've made this mistake myself. Years ago, I met someone I was drawn to immediately, so I laid it all out. My values, my past, what I wanted, my views on nearly everything. And what happened? It fizzled. Not because the connection wasn't real, but because I removed any sense of discovery. I gave away the entire map without inviting her on the journey. Mystery isn't about playing games, it's about pacing. It's the difference between a great novel and a bullet point summary. One invites exploration, the other satisfies quickly but is forgotten just as fast. A woman who reveals herself gradually, with authenticity but restraint, creates depth. She becomes a presence that lingers. Her silences invite thought. Her layered stories provoke reflection. She allows you to feel like you're earning access, not just being handed everything. That's how you become unforgettable. When a man walks away from a conversation still thinking, what was she really trying to say there? Or why did that moment feel different? That's where the emotional loop begins. And it's that loop that keeps pulling him back. You don't need to be loud to leave an impact. You just need to be compelling enough that he wants to keep turning the page. There's a deep insecurity that many people carry, often without realizing it. It shows up subtly in the way we speak, in the way we shrink ourselves in conversation, and especially in how we explain and over-explain our decisions, our boundaries, even our personalities. At the root of it is the belief that who we are isn't quite enough on its own, so we justify. We fill silence with noise. We make disclaimers before sharing a truth. And slowly, we train the people around us to question our conviction because we're signaling that we're not confident in it ourselves. I've done this myself in moments where I doubted my authority, whether it was in work, relationships, or speaking publicly. I'd catch myself offering too many reasons for a simple choice, trying to soften a no, apologizing for having standards. And what I noticed is this: the more I explained, the more uncertain I felt. The more uncertain I felt, the less seriously I was taken. The ability to simply take up space, to state what you feel, need, or value without defending it is rare. And rare things are respected. When a woman says, "I'm not okay with that," and leaves it very no long story, no plea to be understood it lands. Not because it's aggressive, but because it's grounded. It comes from a place of inner certainty. This is where power comes from. Not from controlling others, but from mastering your own frame. Owning your space means you don't seek permission to exist as you are. You don't perform worthiness. You know you're enough, even if someone else hasn't realized it yet. And when you carry that kind of certainty, people feel it. They stop asking you to explain and start rising to meet you. There's something incredibly costly about constantly needing to be understood. And yet, so many people, especially those who are thoughtful, empathetic, and deeply invested in their relationships, fall into the habit of over-explaining. They do it because they don't want to be misunderstood. They do it because they're afraid. Their needs will seem too much, their boundaries too rigid, their desires too inconvenient. But what they don't realize is that every time they over-explain, they're quietly signaling uncertainty. And uncertainty never inspires respect. I've seen this happen in both personal and professional settings. Years ago, I worked with a woman who was remarkably intelligent, clear, and capable. But every time she made a decision, whether it was in a meeting or a relationship, she'd follow it up with 3 layers of justification. Not because she needed to, but because she didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Eventually, I asked her, "Do you believe in the choices you're making?" She said, "Yes, of course." And I said, "Then stop trying to sell them." There's a fundamental shift that occurs when you stop negotiating your presence. When you stop qualifying everything you say and simply state it calmly, without flinching, you occupy your space. And that's a powerful thing, because confidence isn't the absence of doubt, it's the willingness to stand firm even when others might not immediately agree. People who own their space speak with clarity, not explanation. They say no without a follow-up speech. They share their values without needing applause. And that groundedness is magnetic. It says, I don't need to be everything to everyone. I just need to be fully aligned with myself. And in a world that constantly pressures you to justify your worth, the one who doesn't stands out. We live in a world of noise, constant input, endless scrolling, distraction at every turn. And because of that, genuine presence has become one of the rarest and most powerful currencies. Most people are only half there. They're listening while thinking about their next sentence, nodding while checking their phone, showing up physically but not emotionally. And yet, the people who make the deepest impression, the ones we remember, the ones we think about long after they're gone, are the ones who were actually there with us. I remember a conversation I had with someone during a time in my life when everything felt chaotic. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, and she wasn't doing anything dramatic. She was simply listening, not interrupting, not offering quick solutions, not distracted, just fully present. And in that moment, it felt like I had room to be seen. I walked away thinking not just about what we talked about, but about how she made me feel. It stuck with me. Not because she was the loudest or most impressive person in the room, but because she brought her full self to a single moment. Presence communicates value. It tells someone, you matter enough for me to give you all of me, even for just a little while. That kind of attention is healing. It creates emotional imprint. And when someone leaves an interaction feeling understood, heard, and felt, they don't forget you. When you bring presence into your relationships, you're not just building connection, you're creating memory. You're becoming an experience someone wants to return to. And the irony is, the more you can slow down and be fully where you are, the more unforgettable you become. Because in a world starving for real connection, your full attention is the rarest gift you can give. Desire doesn't grow in the presence of constant availability. It grows in tension, in the space between moments, in the breath you don't immediately fill. When something is always there, always ready, it begins to fade into the background, not because it lacks value, but because the mind no longer registers it as exceptional. Scarcity creates value, not because you're playing games, but because the human psyche is drawn to what it can't fully possess on demand. I've experienced this on both ends. I remember being in a relationship where I gave constant attention, time, presence, thinking it would deepen the bond. But instead, it made me invisible. Not because I lacked substance, but because I removed all friction, all anticipation. The space between us disappeared, and with it, the magnetism. Later, I learned that the most impactful connections I'd ever had were with people who knew when to step back, not to punish or withdraw, but to let the interaction breathe. And that breathing space made every moment of contact more charged, more meaningful. This isn't about disappearing or creating anxiety. It's about holding your shape, having a life rich enough, full enough, that someone has to enter it rather than you always merging into theirs. When you stop centering your time and energy around another person's availability, you invite them to rise to meet you. You give them the opportunity to notice your absence and feel the subtle pull of wanting you back in their world. We don't value what's easy to access. We value what we have to reach for. So when you allow for that distance, you're not losing connection, you're deepening it through contrast. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let them wonder where you are. Independence is not a preference. It's a foundational requirement for any relationship built on mutual respect. And yet, so many people walk into relationships looking for someone to complete themers if the right person will somehow patch over the missing pieces of identity, purpose, or self-worth. That's not love. That's dependency in disguise. And dependency always demands more than it can sustain. I've seen it time and time again, not just in the people I've coached, but in my own life. Years ago, I dated someone who wanted to be with me constantly. Every free moment, every spare hour was meant to be shared. At first, it felt flattering, but over time, it became suffocating. Not because she wasn't wonderful, but because her happiness became tethered to my presence. There was no space for her to just be her. No passions she pursued outside of us. And what I realized was that what drew me in at first affection eventually became the very thing that pushed me away. Compare that to another relationship where the woman I was seeing had a full life of her own. She had goals, a mission, a fire that burned with or without my attention. And the paradox was, the more I saw her thriving on her own, the more I wanted to be part of her world. That independence didn't create distance, it created gravity. It made her presence feel like a privilege, not an expectation. The point is, independence isn't about being alone. It's about being whole. When you are no longer seeking someone to fill a void, but to join you on the path you're already walking, that's when connection becomes powerful, sustainable, and real. Because the strongest relationships are built between two complete people, not two halves hoping the other will make them whole. There's a growing belief in our culture that vulnerability means spilling everything, sharing every insecurity, every wound, every story the moment we meet someone, as if exposure equals authenticity. But that's not vulnerability. That's a lack of boundaries. Real vulnerability is measured. It's deliberate. It's rooted in discernment. And when it's done with intention, it builds connection that's not only deep, but enduring. I've had conversations with people where they opened up too quickly, too broadly thinking that it would create intimacy. But it didn't. It created discomfort because what was being asked in return was trust that hadn't been earned yet. Vulnerability has to match the level of emotional safety present in the relationship. When it doesn't, it becomes a burden, not a bond. Now, I remember a moment with someone I cared about deeply. She didn't share everything at once. But one night, in a quiet moment, she let me and told me about something she had overcome, not with drama, but with dignity. That one story changed how I saw her. It wasn't the details that moved me. It was the truth in how she carried it. She wasn't looking for pity or validation. She was offering something realer humanity on her own terms. And that made me want to step closer. The point isn't to hide who you are. It's to reveal the right parts of you at the right time in the right way. Vulnerability is a gift, not a transaction. When you give it too freely, it loses meaning. But when you offer it from a place of strength, it creates emotional depth that's unforgettable. Because people don't fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with truth and the courage it takes to share it. One of the most misunderstood elements of attraction is the idea of access. Show much of yourself you give and when. There's a difference between being open and being wide open. People respect what they have to earn, not what is handed to them too easily. When you allow someone to gradually uncover your inner world, they begin to invest. And where there is investment, there is value. That's how emotional intimacy is built, not through a flood of information, but through carefully placed breadcrumbs. This principle mirrors the process of mentorship I've experienced in my own life. The mentors I admired most didn't hand me the keys to their knowledge in one sitting. They gave me insights in stages based on how much I showed up, how curious I remained, and how deeply I engaged. That structure made every lesson meaningful. Every new piece of access felt earned, not given. It pulled me in, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Relationships are no different. When you reveal everything too soon, your past, your dreams, your doubts, you deprive the other person of the experience of earning your trust. And worse, you rob yourself of the ability to see how they handle you in stages. Do they stay curious? Do they respect the pace? Do they engage with depth? Or only when it's easy? Leaving emotional breadcrumbs means you share intentionally. You drop a detail here, a deeper truth there, not as manipulation, but as a map that someone has to choose to follow. And if they do, they earn the privilege of seeing more. This gives the connection weight, meaning progression, because a person who gets to earn your inner world never forgets the value of what they've been given. There's a profound difference between showing someone your interest and chasing their attention. One is grounded in self-worth. The other is driven by fear of loss. And when you don't believe you're the prize, you start performing for affection. You start proving yourself, persuading someone to see your value when the real power lies in simply being the value. In my early 20s, I found myself doing just that, trying to prove I was enough. Every message sent too soon, every call made out of anxiety rather than clarity, chipped away at my self-respect. I told myself I was just being open, just showing effort. But what I was really doing was chasing. And chasing by its very nature places the other person in the position of power, whether they've earned it or not. The truth is, attraction doesn't need pressure to grow. It needs space to breathe and substance to respond to. When you lead with dignity, when your actions say, I'm already full, I'm already whole, people notice. There's a gravity to it. You're not trying to get them to choose you. You're letting them witness why they should. The woman who sees herself as the prize doesn't try to impress. She expresses. She doesn't push for connection. She creates it. Through her energy, her presence, her boundaries. She knows that if someone is truly meant to see her worth, they'll step up not because they're being chased,